Welcome to Cafe Tales. Tonight we delve into the fog-laden streets of 1925 London, where Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings confront a chilling enigma. A man with no name, no past, and a confession of murder he cannot explain. Join us for the Case of the Nameless Man, a tale of sacrifice and deception, crafted in homage to the masterful Agatha Christie, whose genius we honor, though this mystery unfolds on our own terms. Before we begin, share in the comments, where are you watching from? Now, let the story unfold. Chapter 1. The Confession. It was a bleak October morning in 1925, the kind of gray, damp day that seemed to drape London in a veil of melancholy, when Inspector Japp of Scotland Yard telephoned my friend Hercule Poirot. I was in the midst of breakfast at our Whitehaven Mansions flat, the aroma of coffee mingling with the faint tang of city fog seeping through the window, when the sharp ring of the telephone interrupted my thoughts. "Poirot, old fellow," Japp's voice crackled over the line, laced with that familiar blend of exasperation and intrigue I had come to know so well. "I've stumbled onto the most peculiar case in my 20 years on the force. Got a chap here who wandered in 3 days ago, bold as brass, claiming he's committed murder. Trouble is, he can't tell me who he's killed, where it happened, when it occurred, or even his own blasted name. Every question gets the same answer. I don't know. Thought it might tickle your fancy." Poirot, seated opposite me in his immaculate morning attire, mustache waxed to perfection, tie knotted with surgical precision, set down his coffee cup with the deliberation of a man about to embark on a hunt. His eyes gleamed with that singular spark that always heralded a challenge to his famous little gray cells. "Most intriguing, mon ami," he murmured, his voice soft but vibrant with curiosity. "This man, he appeared at Scotland Yard of his own volition, you say?" "Walking right up to the front desk, looking like something dredged from the Thames," replied Japp. "But here's the odd bit. He asked for you by name, claims he saw it in a discarded newspaper along the embankment, insists he's a murderer, begs us to arrest him, but beyond that, it's I don't know to every blessed question." "And you have made no progress in identifying him?" Poirot asked, his fingers beginning their familiar dance, drumming lightly on the arm of his chair. "Not a scrap," said Japp. "No papers, no marks, beyond a freshly shaved head. Dr. Morrison from the prison medical service had a look. Says it's genuine amnesia, likely from psychological trauma, not a knock to the skull. The man's distress is real, not putting on an act." Within the hour, we found ourselves in Japp's cluttered office at Scotland Yard, the air thick with the scent of ink, tobacco, and the restless energy of London's criminal justice machinery. The gray light filtering through a grimy window cast a pall over the room, lending an air of uncertainty to the proceedings. Through the one-way glass of the adjacent interview room, we observed the man who had so confounded the Yard. He was perhaps 50, tall and lean, with a bearing that suggested aristocracy despite his pitiful state. His head was shaved clean, the work recent and thorough, with no trace of stubble to soften the starkness of his scalp. His clothing was that of a vagrant, a threadbare jacket, patched trousers, and boots so worn they seemed to tell tales of endless wandering. Yet his posture remained erect. His hands, though stained with dirt, bore the softness of a gentleman unaccustomed to toil. His eyes, clear and intelligent, held a haunted quality, as if memories of some terrible deed hovered just beyond his grasp. "Been here 3 days," said Japp, easing his considerable frame into a creaking chair. "Walked in off the street looking as you see him. Cooperative enough, eats what we give him, sleeps in a cell, even seems grateful. But ask about his past, his name, or this supposed murder, and it's the same brick wall. I don't know. The prison. Chaplin tried a spiritual tack. Nothing. Our best interrogators had a go, even pushed him hard, thinking he might be shamming. But he just grows more confused, more wretched. Poirot, his suit as pristine as if he'd stepped from a tailor's shop, studied the figure through the glass with unwavering focus. And he asked for you specifically, mon ami? That's what stumps me, admitted Jap, scratching his jaw. How does a man with no memory know my name? Says he saw it in a newspaper by the Thames, but can't recall reading it. Just felt compelled to come here, to confess. The clothing, Poirot said, his voice cutting through my reverie. It has been examined, I presume? Thoroughly, replied Jap. From Harrington and Company, one of those big department stores. Labels torn out deliberately, not worn away. No personal effects, not a farthing, not a scrap of paper. Aha, Poirot said, his eyebrows lifting slightly. Most significant. The removal of labels suggests intent to prevent identification. The question is, was this done by him or to him? I believe, mon ami, Poirot said, rising with that fluid grace that always surprised me. It is time we spoke with this mysterious gentleman ourselves. A fresh approach may uncover what others have missed. Be my guest, said Jap, gesturing toward the interview room. But don't expect miracles. We've tried everything short of hypnosis. The interview room was as unwelcoming as I'd expected. A bare bulb casting stark shadows, a scarred wooden table, mismatched chairs, and walls painted in that dismal institutional green designed to sap the spirit. The man sat perfectly still, hands folded, his gaze fixed on some distant point. As we entered, he looked up with an expression of desperate hope, as if each new face might hold the key to his lost past. Good morning, Poirot said, settling into the chair opposite with a gentle authority that never failed to command attention. I am Hercule Poirot, and this is my friend Captain Hastings. Inspector Jap has asked us to speak with you. The man's eyes brightened faintly, recognition flickering. Mr. Poirot? Yes, I've heard your name. You solve mysteries. Indeed, monsieur, Poirot said, his tone warm yet probing. And you present us with a most curious puzzle. You maintain that you have committed murder. Yes, sir. I know I have. His voice was cultured, unwavering, carrying the conviction of truth despite his confusion. And yet you cannot tell us whom you have killed? I see images, he said slowly, his face tightening with anguish. Darkness, a man falling, voices in the night, angry, threatening, but who they were, what they did. He shook his head, his hands clenching briefly. I don't know. These men, Poirot continued, his voice steady and encouraging, did they harm you in some way? Perhaps, he said, frowning with effort. I think they struck me, or gave me something, a drink maybe, that clouded my mind. It's all so vague, like a dream I can't grasp. And how did you come to be here at Scotland Yard? Poirot asked, leaning forward slightly. The man's expression gained a touch of certainty. I walked along the Thames embankment for hours, perhaps days. I was tired, hungry, lost. I found a newspaper discarded, with Inspector Jap's name in it. Something told me I must come here, that only the police could help me understand what I'd done. Poirot nodded, his gaze never leaving the man's face. Your clothing. Do you recall how you came by it? No, sir, he replied, glancing at his threadbare jacket. But I noticed no hair clippings on the collar, though my head was shaved recently. It feels wrong, these clothes. Very observant, Poirot said, a faint smile of approval touching his lips. Tell me, can you read and write? Yes, he said with a hint of surprise. The newspaper, I understood it. And do you wear spectacles? He paused, squinting slightly as if testing his vision. I'm not sure. Sometimes I feel I'm straining to see clearly, as if something's missing. Mon ami, Poirot murmured, leaning back in his chair, his mind clearly racing. Most interesting. Indeed. As the interview drew to a close, I found myself increasingly convinced that we were dealing with something far darker than simple amnesia. The shaved head, the torn labels, the absence of any personal effects, all pointed to a deliberate attempt to strip this man of his identity. But by whom, and for what purpose? His suffering was palpable, his confusion genuine, yet the intelligence in his eyes suggested a mind struggling against an imposed barrier. Chapter 2. The investigation begins. The chill of an October dawn lingered in the air as Poirot and I sat in our Whitehaven mansion's drawing room, the fire crackling softly against the morning's gloom. My friend had spent the previous evening in silent reverie, his fingers steepled beneath his chin, his mind no doubt sifting through the enigma of the nameless man who claimed murder, yet recalled nothing. I, too, found my thoughts returning to that haunted figure, his cultured voice at odds with his vagrant rags, his eyes tormented by shadows he could not name. Hastings, mon ami, Poirot said at last, rising to adjust his already flawless tie in the mirror. This affair is no mere quirk of fate. The precision with which this man's identity has been obliterated suggests a plan most calculated. Not desperation, but organization. Someone has woven a web to keep him silent, and we must unravel it, thread by thread. We arrived at Scotland Yard to find Dr. Morrison awaiting us in Japp's cluttered office, his medical bag resting on a chair and a folder of notes clutched in his hand. A slight man with prematurely gray hair, his intense gaze betrayed a mind accustomed to peering into the troubled depths of human consciousness. I've completed a thorough examination of your mysterious patient, Morrison began, settling into a seat with brisk efficiency. It is a case most extraordinary. In 30 years of psychiatric practice, I have rarely encountered such selective amnesia. There is no physical trauma, no bruising, no signs of concussion to account for his condition. Yet the loss appears genuine. He speaks of vivid flashes, running through darkness, men's voices raised in anger, scenes of violence. But when I probe deeper, he becomes agitated, retreating into himself as if the memories are too painful to grasp. Poirot leaned forward, his expression one of keen interest. Most intriguing, Doctor. His intellect, his personality, these remain intact, yet recent events are erased. This suggests not a natural trauma, but interference, perhaps a method sophisticated enough to target specific memories while preserving the core of the man. Precisely, Morrison agreed, his voice tinged with professional fascination. His faculties are remarkably sharp. He reasons, observes, even makes deductions. Despite the fog that clouds his past, it is as if his mind has been surgically altered, as you might say. I found myself marveling at the implications. You mean someone deliberately tampered with his memory? Consider the evidence, Hastings, Poirot replied, his tone measured but firm. A mind that retains its education, its courtesy, its ability to reason. Such a mind does not lose specific memories by chance. None. This is the work of someone with knowledge, perhaps even expertise, in the workings of the human psyche. Before I could respond, Inspector Japp entered, accompanied by Lemoiselle. Scotland Yard's chief forensic specialist. A tall, thin man with pale eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles, Lemoiselle carried a leather portfolio with the reverence of a scholar handling ancient manuscripts. His reputation for uncovering the smallest details preceded him, and I sensed his findings would prove pivotal. "Gentlemen," Lemoiselle began, spreading a series of photographs across Jap's desk with meticulous care. "I have subjected the man's clothing and effects to the most rigorous examination. The jacket and trousers were purchased from Harrington and Company approximately 5 to 6 years ago, traced through fabric and stitching. The internal labels have been torn out, not cut, suggesting haste or urgency. There are no personal effects, not a coin, not a scrap of paper, not even a trace of lint that might hint at his recent movements." Poirot's fingers began their familiar drumming, a sign his mind was racing. "Most curious. The absence of trace evidence is itself a clue, is it not? A man living an ordinary life accumulates fragments, dust, threads, small tokens. To find none suggests a deliberate cleansing. There is more," Lemoiselle continued, pointing to a photograph of the trouser cuffs. "I found clay particles embedded in the cuffs, the soles of his boots, and under his fingernails. These match a specific geological formation located approximately 30 miles northeast of London. Additionally, there are 2 small blood droplets on the jacket's front at waist level, of his own type, AB, no more than 3 days old. Finally, indentations on the bridge of his nose indicate prolonged use of spectacles worn for hours daily." Poirot rose, pacing the small office with that fluid grace that always betrayed his excitement. "Ah, Monsieur Lemoiselle, this is most illuminating. The torn labels suggest panic or haste. A careful criminal would cut them cleanly. The clay under his nails implies not merely passing through that terrain, but a struggle, perhaps grasping at earth in desperation. The blood at waist level, defensive wounds, likely to hands or arms, not a head injury. And the spectacles, removed, to impair his vision, to make him more dependent, more confused." He paused, his gaze distant, as if seeing the scene unfold. "The shaved head, professional work, not a hasty disguise. No, it is for humiliation, to strip him of his sense of self, to render him malleable. Together, these clues paint a picture," he concluded. "A gentleman, educated perhaps of means, subjected to a systematic erasure of identity, yet he is kept alive, helpless. Why? His captors may need his knowledge, his cooperation, or perhaps his signature on some document, but they cannot risk him revealing what he knows." Jap's weathered face broke into a grin. "You're saying we've got a conspiracy on our hands, Poirot?" "Exactly, mon ami," Poirot replied, his voice firm with conviction. "Dr. Morrison may proceed. Those responsible may not welcome his recovery. And you, Monsieur Lemoiselle, focus your efforts on that clay. If we can pinpoint its exact origin, we may discover where he was held captive." I found myself caught up in Poirot's reasoning, the pieces of the puzzle beginning to form a shadowy outline. The man's aristocratic bearing, his soft hands, the professional barbering, all pointed to a life far removed from the vagrant he appeared to be. Yet someone had taken pains to strip him of all that defined him, leaving only a shell tormented by half-remembered guilt. As our discussion concluded, Jap mentioned that altered photographs of the man, restored with hair and spectacles, were set to appear in the evening papers. "By tomorrow morning, all of London will see him as he might truly appear," he said, rubbing his hands. "If anyone knows him, they'll come forward." I nodded, but my thoughts were elsewhere, fixed on the man's haunted expression and the sinister precision of his condition. "Do you think he's truly a murderer, Poirot?" I asked as we prepared to leave. Poirot's expression grew thoughtful. "Whether he is guilty or not, Hastings, is but one piece of this puzzle. The greater mystery is why his mind has been so carefully altered, and by whom. This is no ordinary crime, mon ami. It is a design most intricate, and I suspect its unraveling will lead us into dangerous territory." As we stepped into the corridor, the hum of Scotland Yard's activity fading behind us, I felt that familiar stir of anticipation, now laced with unease. The nameless man's plight was no mere accident of fate. It was a challenge that would test even Poirot's formidable intellect, and I could not shake the sense that darker truths awaited us. Chapter 3. A Name from the Past. The hum of London's morning bustle filled the streets as I made my way to Scotland Yard, the crisp air carrying the scent of cold smoke and fresh bread from nearby bakeries. The previous day's revelations had left me restless, my mind replaying the nameless man's haunted expression and Poirot's conviction of a deliberate conspiracy. I found my friend already in Japp's office, surrounded by a disarray of newspapers, their headlines blaring the story of the mysterious amnesiac who claimed murder. The altered photographs. Our visitor, restored with a full head of hair and wire-rimmed spectacles, had ignited the city's curiosity, and I sensed we were on the cusp of a breakthrough. "Ah, Hastings," Poirot greeted me, his voice brimming with anticipation, as he folded a copy of the Times. "You arrive at a most opportune moment. Our enigmatic Monsieur Genesipa may soon regain his name." Japp, nursing a steaming cup of tea, looked up with barely concealed excitement, his weathered face creased with the strain of overnight inquiries. The modified portraits made it into all the morning editions, the Times, Daily Mail, Evening Standard. We've had the usual lot of well-meaning citizens and outright cranks phoning in. But one call stands out, a young woman who seemed to genuinely recognize him, though she became nervous when I pressed for more details. "She's on her way here now," Poirot added, adjusting his tie with that habitual precision that never failed to impress. "She saw the photograph in the Times and believes she knows who he is. Let us hope her testimony will pierce the veil of his amnesia." As if summoned by our words, a tentative knock sounded at the door. Constable Morrison entered, his young face flushed with the importance of his duty. "Begging your pardon, Inspector, but the young woman is here, the one who telephoned about the mysterious gentleman. Says she saw the photograph and has returned to speak with you." Poirot's eyebrows rose slightly. "Excellent. Show her in, Constable." The woman who entered was perhaps 30, with the practical demeanor and slightly deferential manner of someone in domestic service. Her simple brown coat and sturdy shoes spoke of modest means, but her hands, though roughened by work, moved, with a grace that hinted at finer upbringing. Her accent, soft and melodic, betrayed rural French origins, likely one of the many young women who had come to London seeking employment in grand households. "I'm Marie Joseph Lulick," she announced. Without preamble, her voice steady despite a hint of nervousness. "I believe I may know something about the man in your photograph." "Please, mademoiselle, take a seat," Poirot said graciously, indicating a chair with a courteous gesture. "You mentioned on the telephone that you recognized our mysterious visitor." She nodded, reaching into her handbag to produce the morning's edition of the Times, folded to show the altered portrait. At first glance, I didn't think it could be him. The man in the photograph looked nothing like my employer. But then she paused, her fingers tracing the image. "I have this habit. When I'm thinking, my hand wanders, and I find myself drawing on photographs, adding details that seem missing. I could see you'd already given him hair and spectacles. Very clever, by the way. But something wasn't quite right, so I adjusted, made the hair grayer, with more of a wave, and changed the spectacles to wire-rimmed ones like my employer wears. Poirot leaned forward. His interest piqued. And with these modifications, mademoiselle, you recognized him? It looked remarkably like him, she admitted, passing the newspaper across the desk, though I still couldn't quite believe it. Monsieur le Comte is a gentleman of very regular habits. He rarely ventures far from home, and his appearance is always immaculate. To see him in such a state— She shook her head, bewilderment evident. In her eyes, I had been following the exchange with growing excitement, my pen scratching notes on a pad. And who exactly is this employer of yours, Miss Lujalik? Count Emitter, she replied promptly. I've been in service to the family for nearly 3 years. They live in Belgravia on Eaton Square, a fine house, though not without its troubles. Poirot's fingers began their characteristic drumming against the desk, a sure sign his mind was at work. Most illuminating, mademoiselle. Tell me, when did you last see the Count? It's been 5 days now, Marie-Joseph said, her brow furrowing, which is unusual because Monsieur Lant rarely leaves the house. He spends most of his time in his study, reading books upon books, always surrounded by them. And the Countess? I inquired, recalling the cold woman we had yet to meet. What was her reaction to her husband's absence? Marie-Joseph's expression grew decidedly cooler, her lips pressing into a thin line. Madame Lascelles seemed unperturbed. When I asked whether I should prepare dinner for 2, she told me quite sharply to mind my own business. She's not what you might call a warm-hearted woman. Poirot rose from his chair and began pacing the small office, his steps measured and deliberate, as if each one helped him piece together the puzzle. Most intriguing indeed. Tell me, mademoiselle, what manner of man is this Count de Santa Verta? She considered for a moment, her hands folding neatly in her lap. He's very quiet, very scholarly, always reading, as I said. The house has an enormous library, and he seems to have devoured every volume in it. He's unfailingly polite to the staff, which cannot be said of his wife. And their relationship? Poirot asked delicately, his voice a gentle probe. Marie-Joseph hesitated, choosing her words with care. Madame la Comtesse treats her husband with considerable disdain. She often speaks to him as if he were a ward child rather than her spouse. There's little warmth between them, I'm afraid. Do they have children? I asked, sensing this might be key. A son, Rudolph, she replied. He's perhaps 25 years old. Quite handsome, but— She trailed off, discomfort evident. Please, mademoiselle, Poirot encouraged, stopping, his pacing to fix her with his penetrating gaze. Speak freely. Your observations may be crucial. Well, he rarely seems to do anything productive, she said, lowering her voice as if the walls might hear. Claims to be a poet, but I've never seen a line of verse from him. He comes and goes at all hours, often bringing friends who seem questionable. I exchanged a significant glance with Poirot. This detail might well connect to the other men our visitor had mentioned in his fragmented recollections. The voices in the night that haunted him. Tell me, Poirot continued, resuming his pacing, has the family experienced any unusual difficulties recently? Financial troubles, perhaps? Or other complications? Marie-Joseph hesitated again, her fingers twisting the strap of her handbag. I couldn't say for certain, but there have been arguments, heated discussions behind closed doors, and young Monsieur Adolphe has seemed particularly agitated lately. He had some sort of falling out with one of his usual companions, a rather unpleasant fellow who used to visit regularly. "Can you describe this unpleasant fellow?" asked Jap, his pen poised. "Coarse, demanding," she said. He had a way of looking at the house as if he were appraising its contents. When he stopped coming around, I confess I was relieved. Poirot stopped pacing and fixed Marie-Joseph with his most engaging smile. "Mademoiselle, I believe it would be most helpful if you could accompany us to Belgravia. Your presence might assist in confirming our mysterious visitor's identity, and perhaps help him recover his memory." "If you think it would help," she agreed readily, though a note of apprehension crept into her voice. "Though I should warn you, Madame Lontest will not be pleased to see me arriving with the police. She values discretion above all else." "Then we shall endeavor to be discreet," Poirot assured her. "But first I think our amnesia victim should see you. Perhaps a familiar face will unlock some of those buried memories." We made our way to the holding area, where our mysterious visitor, now potentially identified as Count Amédée de Santa Verta, sat quietly reading a newspaper that had been provided for him. The borrowed spectacles perched on his nose gave him a more scholarly appearance, softening the harshness of his shaved head and rough clothing. When we entered, he looked up with that same expression of hopeful uncertainty that had characterized our previous encounters. "Good morning," Poirot said gently. "I have brought someone who believes she may know you." Marie-Joseph stepped forward, studying the man's face intently. "It's difficult to be certain with the shaved head and those clothes, but yes, I believe this is Monsieur Long." Our visitor looked at her with painful concentration, as if willing the fog in his mind to lift. "You seem familiar," he said slowly. "Your voice especially, but I cannot place you." "I'm Marie-Joseph Lulek," she said softly. "I've been working in your household for 3 years. I clean your study every Tuesday, and you always thank me very politely." For a moment, something flickered in the man's eyes, a spark of recognition that quickly faded. "Marie-Joseph," he repeated slowly. "Yes, that name, but everything else remains dark." Poirot observed this exchange with keen interest. "The selective nature of his memory loss continues to intrigue me," he murmured to me in an undertone. "He retains enough intellect to read that newspaper and follow our conversation, yet specific personal memories remain elusive." With the spectacles fitted more comfortably, the transformation was remarkable. Even without his natural hair, the aristocratic bearing became more pronounced, the intelligent eyes more compelling. Marie-Joseph, recognizing his discomfort, carefully produced a pair of wire-rimmed spectacles from her handbag. "These are Monsieur Long's own glasses," she explained softly. "I thought to bring them when I came to identify him." "Much better," Marie-Joseph confirmed. "That's definitely Monsieur Long, though I've never seen him in such a state." "Then it is time," Poirot announced, "that we pay a visit to the Santa Verta household. Come, Hastings, and you, Mademoiselle Lulek, if you would be so kind as to guide us." The journey to Belgravia took us through some of London's most prestigious neighborhoods, the grand Georgian terraces standing like silent sentinels of old money and established position. Eaton Square proved to be one such enclave. Though as we approached the Santa Verta residence, I noticed signs of genteel decline. The paint on the window frames needed refreshing, and the small front garden, while neat, lacked the meticulous care that unlimited funds could provide. "The family has experienced some financial reversals in recent years," Marie-Joseph explained as we climbed the steps to the imposing front door. "Nothing dramatic, but enough to require certain economies." The woman who answered our ring was tall and elegantly dressed, possessed of that kind of cold beauty that repels rather than invites. Her dark hair was styled in the latest fashion, and her clothing spoke of expensive tastes. But there was something in her manner, an imperious tilt of the chin, that immediately put one on guard. "Madame la Comtesse Santa Verta?" Poirot inquired politely, removing his hat with a flourish. "I am she," the woman replied, her voice carrying the crisp tones of someone accustomed to command. "And you are?" "Hercule Poirot, madame," he said. "And this is my associate, Captain Hastings. We are here on a matter concerning your husband." The Countess's expression hardened perceptibly. "What has that fool done now?" she asked, her callousness startling in its bluntness. "Perhaps we might discuss this inside," Poirot suggested diplomatically, his voice smooth as silk. "I suppose you must," she replied with evident reluctance, stepping aside to admit us. "Though if this concerns one of Amédé's ridiculous escapades, I have little patience for such nonsense." The interior of the Belgravia house reflected the same genteel decline as the exterior. The furnishings were of excellent quality, but showed signs of age, and there was an unmistakable air of reduced circumstances despite the family's efforts to maintain appearances. The high ceilings and elegant proportions spoke of grander days when the Santa Verta family had commanded greater wealth. "Your husband has been missing for several days," Poirot began without preamble as we settled in the drawing room. "Were you not concerned?" The Countess gave a short, bitter laugh. "Concerned, Mr. Poirot? My husband has the mentality of a schoolboy. He is given to sudden enthusiasms and equally sudden departures. If he has wandered off on another of his adventures, he will return when hunger or discomfort drives him home." "Most interesting," Poirot murmured. "And what sort of adventures does Monsieur Long typically pursue?" "He fancies himself a man of action," she replied with undisguised contempt. "His study is filled with the most ridiculous novels, tales of spies and international intrigue, adventures in exotic locations. I believe he sometimes confuses fiction with reality." "Might we see this study?" I requested, curious to see the room that defined the man. "If you insist," the Countess said with a shrug, rising to lead us down a corridor lined with family portraits. The room beyond was a bibliophile's paradise. Shelves lined with books from floor to ceiling, comfortable reading chairs positioned to catch the best light from the tall Georgian windows, and a massive desk covered with papers and writing materials. But as the Countess had indicated, the selection was unconventional for a nobleman. Adventure novels, spy thrillers, tales of exotic intrigue dominated the shelves, rather than classical literature or scholarly works. "Remarkable," I observed, scanning the titles. "Your husband certainly has eclectic tastes." "He has the tastes of an overgrown adolescent," the Countess snapped. "At his age, such fantasies are not merely inappropriate. They are pathetic." Poirot, however, was studying the collection with evident interest, his fingers trailing lightly over the spines. "A man's reading reveals much about his character, madam. Your husband clearly possesses an active imagination, and perhaps yearns for a more exciting existence than domestic tranquility provides. Exactly the sort of romantic nonsense that has landed him in whatever predicament currently occupies." "Your attention," she replied coldly. "And your son?" Poirot inquired. "Does young Rodolphe share his father's literary interests?" For the first time, the Countess's harsh expression softened slightly. "Rodolphe is a poet, a true artist. His interests are far more refined than his father's juvenile fantasies." "Is he at home? I should very much like to meet him." "He is traveling," the Countess replied quickly. "Young men require freedom to develop their talents." Indeed, Poirot agreed. And when do you expect his return? When his inspiration requires it, she answered vaguely. As we prepared to leave, Poirot turned to deliver what would prove to be a prophetic observation, his tone grave and measured. Madame la Comtesse, I fear your husband may have found himself involved in circumstances far more dangerous than any adventure novel. If my suspicions prove correct, his life may depend upon our ability to unravel the truth quickly. The Countess's composure cracked for just a moment, revealing something that might have been genuine concern beneath her icy exterior. What do you mean? She asked sharply. I mean, Madame, Poirot replied, that fiction and reality have perhaps converged in ways that none of us could have anticipated. Chapter 4. The Body in the River. The sharp ring of the telephone shattered the quiet of our Whitehaven Mansion's breakfast the following morning, where Poirot and I were reviewing the details of our visit to Belgravia over coffee and toast. The Countess's cold demeanor and Marie Joseph's revelations about the family's tensions had left me unsettled, and I could see Poirot's mind was still turning over the puzzle, his fingers absently drumming on the tablecloth. Poirot, old fellow, Japp's voice boomed through the receiver, laced with urgency and a hint of triumph. You'll want to hear this. We've got a body pulled from the Thames, and it might just connect to your mysterious count. Poirot's expression sharpened instantly, his coffee forgotten. A body, mon ami? Tell me more. Found in a sunken car near Rotherhithe, replied Japp. I'll fill you in when you get here. Bring Hastings. It's a grim scene, but your little methods might spot something we missed. Within the hour, we stood on the muddy banks of the Thames near Rotherhithe, where the morning mist clung to the water like a reluctant ghost, the air heavy with the scent of riverweed and damp earth. A black Morris saloon car, its paintwork dulled and streaked with slime, sat dripping on the embankment, hauled from the depths by a team of constables using ropes and pulleys. The scene was one of organized chaos. Policemen in rain-slicked capes directing operations, a crowd of curious onlookers kept at bay, and the river lapping lazily at the pier as if indifferent to the drama. Inspector Mans, Japp's most reliable, sergeant approached us with a notebook thick with observations, his face bearing the satisfied yet grim expression of a man who had spent the night wresting secrets from the river. Right then, Jack began, consulting his own notes as he led us toward the vehicle. Here's what we know. A Thames waterman spotted the car yesterday evening, sitting in about 12 feet of water near the old pier. Took us until first light to get the proper equipment down here. Had to bring in the fire brigade's lifting apparatus and coordinate with the river police to haul her out safely. Poirot circled the car with his usual meticulous grace, his keen eyes taking in every detail. The partially wound-down windows, the driver's door hanging ajar at an odd angle, suggesting hasty abandonment rather than careful placement. And the occupant, mon ami? He inquired, his voice cutting through the murmur of the constables. Mans pulled back a canvas cover with practiced professionalism, revealing the corpse of a man in his 40s, medium build, with coarse features and cheap clothing that screamed, London's criminal underworld, dead as a doornail, Mervance said grimly. Been in the water at least 6 days, according to Dr. Morrison, but he didn't drown. Someone cracked his skull with something heavy before he went in. Poirot crouched beside the body, his expression one of professional detachment as he examined the wound. Have we identified him? I believe we have, replied Japp, pulling a manila folder from his coat. Fingerprints sent to the Criminal Record Office came back this morning. Name, Hubert Bruno, lately of a doss house in Whitechapel. 3 convictions for fraud, 2 for blackmail, 1 for receiving stolen goods. A regular in the East End's shadier circles. Aha, Poirot murmured, his eyebrows rising slightly. A gentleman of varied criminal talents? And the murder weapon? Mans pointed to a blood-stained tire iron lying nearby, carefully bagged as evidence. Found it right there in the car. With him. Crude, but effective. A single blow to the back of the head would have done it instantly. Most interesting, Poirot observed, standing and brushing invisible dust from his knees. Tell me, Sergeant Mervance, what does the car itself reveal? Stolen about a week ago from outside the Red Lion in Bermondsey, Mervance replied, consulting his notebook. We've had our photographer take pictures of everything, and P.C. Henderson has made detailed sketches. Most peculiar thing is the complete absence of fingerprints on the steering wheel or door handles. Someone took great care to wipe them clean. But there's something odd about the body's position, Mervance continued, gesturing to a sketch. If Bruno had been driving when attacked, you'd expect him behind the wheel. Instead, he was slumped across the passenger side, as if he'd been sitting there when struck from behind. Poirot nodded approvingly, his mind clearly piecing together the implications. Excellent reasoning, mon ami. This suggests our murderer was driving the stolen vehicle. But what brought these two men together in the first place? That's where it gets really interesting, Mr. Poirot, interjected Japp, his voice lowering as if sharing a confidence. We've been making inquiries about Bruno, sent constables round to his usual haunts in the East End. Turns out he'd been flush with money recently, paid off debts that had been hanging over him for months, been seen buying drinks for all and sundry in the local pubs. The proceeds of blackmail, perhaps? Poirot suggested, his tone casual but his interest sharp. That's what we're thinking, confirmed Japp. And here's the clincher. Several witnesses place him in regular company with a well-dressed young gentleman over the past few weeks. Tall, handsome fellow with a refined accent. Goes by the name of Rodolphe. I felt a chill of recognition, the name echoing Marie Joseph's. Description of the Count's son. Young man, you say? Poirot asked. Mid-20s, Mervance said. According to our witnesses, he always seemed nervous when with Bruno, like he was being pressured into something he'd rather avoid. Poirot's fingers began their familiar drumming, his expression one of satisfaction as the puzzle pieces aligned. Ah, mon ami. The threads begin to weave a pattern most recognizable. There's one more thing, Mervance added, producing a water-stained notebook from his pocket. We searched Bruno's lodgings thoroughly, found this hidden under a loose floorboard. The notebook was a ledger of sorts, with dates, amounts of money, and cryptic references to various enterprises. Despite the water damage, certain entries were legible, including one that caught Poirot's immediate attention. RSA, Family Secrets, $50 monthly. The dates corresponded precisely with the period of the Count's memory loss. RSA, I pondered aloud. Rudolph de Santa Verta. It would seem most logical, Hastings, Poirot said, his voice thoughtful. But what family secrets could command $50 per month? And what drove young Rolfe to murder rather than continue paying? As we prepared to leave the crime scene, Japp consulted his watch, the mist beginning to burn off under a weak sun. The newspapers will have the story by evening. Body found in Thames, and all that. Nothing too detailed, mind you, but word will get out. Excellent, Poirot murmured. Now, mon ami, I believe it is time we collected our mysterious Count from his cell. A photograph of the deceased Mr. Bruno may prove most illuminating to his memory. You think seeing the victim will trigger something? I asked, intrigued by the idea. I suspect, Hastings, that his memory may return with remarkable suddenness when presented with the right stimulus, Poirot replied. And the proper setting for such a revelation should be his own home, in the presence of his family. The journey back to Scotland Yard and then to Belgravia was tense. Our mysterious visitor, now identified as the Count, sat quietly in the police vehicle, his hands folded in his lap. The borrowed spectacles gave him a more dignified air, but the rough clothing and shaved head still marked him as a man displaced from his world. Miss Lulek, Poirot said gently as the car wound through London's traffic. We are returning you to your home to reunite you with your family, but I must warn you, there have been developments in your case that may prove disturbing. I understand, Monsieur Poirot, the Count replied, his voice steady but tinged with weariness. I have been preparing myself for whatever truth may emerge from this darkness. And if I were to tell you that we have discovered the identity of the man you claim to have killed? Poirot probed. The Count's eyes widened slightly, a mix of fear and relief flashing across his face. You have found my victim? We have found a body, Poirot said carefully. A man murdered during the exact period of your memory loss. But whether he is your victim, that remains to be seen. Marie Joseph answered our ring at Eaton Square with evident surprise. Oh, Monsieur Rodolphe, she exclaimed. Madame la Comtesse will be so pleased. All will be explained, mademoiselle, Poirot assured her. Is Madame Lonteste at home? Yes, sir. She's in the morning room. Shall I announce you? We shall announce ourselves, interjected Japp with official authority. This is police business. The Countess appeared at the sound of voices, her cold beauty marred by an expression of barely concealed anxiety. When she saw her husband flanked by police officers, her face cycled through surprise, concern, and what might have been resignation. Emmy, she said simply, you have returned. Good morning, Madame Lonteste, Poirot said politely. As you can. See, we have brought your husband home, but I fear there are matters we must discuss. Of course, she replied, though her voice lacked warmth. Please come into the drawing room. Once seated, Poirot wasted no time. Madame, I believe you know why we are here. The investigation into your husband's claims has yielded significant results. And what results might those be? She asked, her hands folded tightly in her lap. We have discovered a body, announced Japp bluntly. A man named Hubert Bruno, found murdered in the Thames, a professional criminal with a specialty in blackmail. The Countess's composure never wavered, but I detected a slight tightening around her eyes. And what does this have to do with my husband's condition? Everything, madame, Poirot replied. For this, Hubert Bruno was known to associate with a young man named Rodolphe, a young man who matches the description of your son. That is impossible, the Countess said flatly. My son is a poet, a gentleman. He would never associate with such people. Nevertheless, Poirot continued, we have reason to believe that this Bruno was blackmailing your family, specifically extorting $50 per month in exchange for his silence about certain family secrets. I watched the Count carefully during this exchange. His face showed the same puzzled concentration I had come to expect, but there was something in his eyes, a flicker of recognition perhaps, or carefully controlled fear. Mon ami, Poirot said, turning to address him directly. I have something I should like you to see. It may help restore your memory of recent events. He produced a photograph of Hubert Bruno, holding it so that the Count could see it clearly. The transformation was remarkable. The Count's face, which had maintained that vague, somewhat vacant expression since his arrival at Scotland Yard, suddenly sharpened with recognition and what appeared to be genuine distress. Mon Dieu, he whispered, his hands beginning to tremble. Yes, yes, I remember now. That face, that mocking smile, it all comes back to me. Your memory has returned? I asked, leaning forward with intense interest. Like a dam bursting, the Count replied, his voice growing stronger and more assured. I see it all now. The meeting by the river, the argument, the moment when I... He stopped, looking directly at Poirot. Yes, monsieur. I killed this man. I remember everything now. The Countess had gone very pale, but she maintained her composure. Amme, what are you saying? The truth I have carried in my subconscious all these days, he said, turning to her. This Bruno, he had been blackmailing our family. He had discovered certain information that would have brought shame upon the Santa Verta name. For weeks I had been paying him to keep quiet, but his demands grew ever larger, ever more impossible to meet. So you arranged to meet him? Poirot prompted gently, his voice encouraging the flow of words. Yes, the Count said. I told him I would make one final payment, but that it must be the end of it. We met by the old pier. I had taken a car thinking to drive far from London afterward. But when I saw him there, smirking, already planning his next demand, something inside me snapped. The Count's narrative was delivered with such conviction, such precise detail, that I found myself completely convinced of its truth. Yet something in Poirot's expression suggested he was listening with more than ordinary attention. His mind alert for inconsistencies. After I struck him down, the Count continued, his voice steady now, I put the body in the car and drove until I found a place where I could push the vehicle into the water. The shock of what I had done, the terrible realization of my crime, must have affected my mind. I remember walking for hours along the Thames, until I found myself at Scotland Yard with no clear memory of how I had gotten there. And now, Poirot asked quietly, now that your memory has returned, how do you feel? Relieved, the Count said simply. I have carried this burden of not knowing for days. Now at least I understand what I have done, and I am prepared to face the consequences. Poirot rose from his chair and began pacing the drawing room, his steps measured, his expression one of deep thought. Mon ami, your account is most comprehensive, yet I find myself with several questions. Of course, the Count said. I will answer whatever I can. This blackmail that Bruno was engaging in, what exactly had he discovered about your family? For the first time since viewing the photograph, the Count seemed to hesitate. It is difficult to speak of such things. Suffice to say, it involved the honor of the Santa Verta name. And your son, Rudolph, what was his role in this affair? My son? The Count's surprise seemed genuine. Rudolph knows nothing of this matter. He has been traveling, pursuing his artistic interests. I see, Poirot said. He stopped his pacing and fixed the Count with his penetrating gaze. Tell me, monsieur, in which river did you dispose of the body? Why, the Thames, of course, the Count replied. I drove along the embankment until... Aha! But that is where you are mistaken, monsieur, Poirot said, for the body of Hubert Bruno was not found in the Thames at all. The silence that followed was profound. The Count's face went through a series of expressions, confusion, realization, and finally something that might have been resignation. Then where? He began. We shall discuss that shortly, monsieur, Poirot said. But first, I believe we must locate your son, Rodolphe, for I suspect he may be able to provide some very illuminating details about this entire affair. The Countess had been listening to this exchange with growing alarm. I don't understand what you're implying, Mr. Poirot. My husband has confessed to the crime. Surely that should be sufficient. "Would that it was so simple, madam," Poirot replied, his tone regretful. "But I fear the truth in this case is rather more complex than a straightforward confession might suggest." Chapter 5. The Son's Guilt. The pieces of our investigation were falling into place with devastating inevitability. The morning sun casting long shadows across Scotland Yard as Japp mobilized his men. Within hours of discovering Hubert Bruno's body in the Thames, every available constable was dispatched to search for Rudolph de Santaverton, whose ties to the victim had been solidified by witness accounts from the East End's shadowy pubs and doss houses. "The beauty of truth, mon ami," Poirot remarked as we left Japp's office, the corridor echoing with the clatter of typewriters and hurried footsteps, "is that even the most elaborate deceptions eventually reveal their flaws through the smallest details. A misplaced word, a forgotten fact, and the house of cards collapses." The breakthrough came that same afternoon, the air in Japp's office thick with the scent of stale coffee and cigarette smoke. Sergeant Mans appeared, his uniform rumpled from a day's hard work, but his eyes alight with the satisfaction of a successful hunt. "We've located young Rudolph de Santaverta, sir," he announced. "Been hiding in a cheap boarding house in Bloomsbury under the name Robert Stanley. Thought he was clever, but the landlady recognized him from our description when we showed her the photographs." "And his behavior when approached?" Poirot inquired, his tone sharp with interest. "Nervous as a cat, Mr. Poirot," Mons replied. "Kept asking if we'd found his father, seemed genuinely worried about the old man's condition. But he came along quietly enough when we explained we just wanted to clear up some questions about his friend, Bruno." Within the hour, we had returned to the Santaverta residence in Belgravia, Rolf in custody. The young man sat rigidly in our police vehicle, his handsome features marred by anxiety and what appeared to be sincere concern for his father. The grand terraces of Eaton Square loomed as we approached, their elegance a stark contrast to the tragedy unfolding within one of their homes. Dr. Morrison had recommended to the magistrate that the Count be released to his family's care under medical supervision, citing his nonviolent condition and the therapeutic value of familiar surroundings for amnesia recovery. Given his social standing and the lack of flight risk, the magistrate had granted the request, pending further medical evaluation. This arrangement allowed the Count to remain at home while the investigation continued, though he remained technically under police supervision. Marie-Joseph answered our ring with obvious relief, her apron dusted with flour from some household task. "Oh, Monsieur Rodolphe," she exclaimed. "Madame la Comtesse will be so pleased. She's been beside herself with worry about Monsieur Long." "How is my father?" Rodolphe asked immediately as we entered the house, his voice strained. "Resting in the garden," Marie-Joseph replied. "His memory came back yesterday when the inspector showed him a photograph, but he's been very quiet since then." The reunion in the drawing room was a study in carefully controlled emotion. The Countess embraced her son with obvious relief, her cold facade cracking briefly to reveal a mother's tenderness, while Count Santaverta rose from his chair with the dignity of a man who had made his peace with fate. "Rodolphe," the Count said quietly, his voice heavy with sorrow, "I had hoped you would be far from London by now." "I couldn't leave you to face this alone, father," Rudolph replied, and I was struck by the genuine affection in his voice, despite the tragic circumstances. "How touching," Poirot observed dryly, his presence a reminder that this was no mere family gathering. "A family reunion, but I fear, Madame Zessie, that we are here on rather more serious business than social calls." The Countess fixed him with her coldest stare, regaining her composure. "I assume you have come to apologize, Monsieur Poirot," My husband has confessed to the crime you were investigating. Surely that should satisfy even your suspicious nature. Indeed, Madame, Poirot replied, settling into a chair with deliberate calm. Your husband's confession was most comprehensive. He remembered everything so clearly once we showed him Bruno's photograph. The meeting by the river, the argument, the fatal blow with the tire iron. Then why is my son here? She demanded, her hands clasping tightly. Because, Madame, Poirot said casually, there are certain details in your husband's confession that require clarification, details that only the true killer would know. What sort of details? Rodolphe asked, his voice edged with tension. The location where the body was disposed of, for instance, Poirot replied, his tone light, but his gaze piercing. Your father was most specific about pushing the car into the water. He described the scene quite vividly. Yes, the Count interjected quickly. I remember it clearly now, the rain, the darkness, the steep bank leading down to the water. Indeed, Poirot said, nodding thoughtfully. And you told us you disposed of the car in the Thames, did you not? Of course, the Count said. I drove along the embankment until I found a suitable spot. Poirot's fingers began drumming on the arm of his chair. Most interesting, because you see, while the car was indeed found in the Thames, it was discovered near Rotherhithe in the old commercial docks area, a very specific location, quite different from the residential embankments where one might casually drive. The Count's face remained steady, but I caught a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. Yet, Poirot continued, his voice gentle but relentless, according to the weather records, there was no precipitation in London during the period in question. It was, in fact, quite clear for 3 consecutive days. Rodolphe had gone very still, his eyes fixed on Poirot with the intensity of a trapped animal. What are you suggesting? I am suggesting, young monsieur, Poirot said, that your father's memory of events is imperfect. Strange that a man who supposedly committed the crime should be so confused about basic details, while you seem remarkably knowledgeable about matters you claim to know nothing of. I don't know what you mean, Rodolphe said, but his voice lacked conviction. Come now, interjected Japp, his official tone cutting through the tension. We've had witnesses place you with Bruno on multiple occasions. We know he was blackmailing your family. The Count stood abruptly, his aristocratic bearing momentarily restored. Inspector, I have confessed to this crime. My son has nothing to do with it. If my memory was imperfect about certain details... Sit down, father, Rodolphe said quietly, his shoulders slumping. It's no use. Rodolphe, no, the Countess cried, her voice sharp with fear. It's finished, mother, Rodolphe said, turning to face Poirot directly. You were correct. My father didn't kill Bruno. I did. The Count sank back into his chair as if the weight of his failure had physically struck him. Rodolphe, you promised. You would leave the country. You swore to us you would disappear. I tried, father, Rodolphe said, his voice thick with emotion. But I couldn't bring myself to abandon you. When I saw in the newspapers that you had been arrested, that you were claiming to have lost your memory, I knew what you were trying to do. Then why didn't you come forward sooner? I asked, puzzled by his hesitation. Because I was a coward, Rodolphe admitted, his handsome face twisted with shame. I kept hoping that somehow your confession would be accepted without investigation, that they would simply declare you unfit for trial due to your mental condition. Poirot had been listening to this exchange with his usual professional detachment, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. So, we have established that you, Mr. Rodolphe, are the true killer. But what drove you to murder? What was Bruno's hold over your family? Rudolph's face flushed with shame as he began his confession. I had been involved in certain activities that would have destroyed our family's reputation if they became known. Nothing violent, you understand, but illegal nonetheless. Confidence games, fraud associating with criminals like Bruno. And Bruno threatened to expose these activities? Poirot prompted, his voice gentle but insistent. He had evidence. Photographs, documents, testimony from accomplices, Rolf said. He said he would destroy not just me, but the entire family name, unless I paid him $50 per month. Which you did for a time, noted Jap. Until the demands became impossible to meet, Rudolph continued. When I told him I couldn't continue, he laughed and said he would approach my parents directly. He described in detail how he would enjoy watching my mother's face when she learned what kind of son she had raised. The Countess had been listening to this confession with growing horror, her hands clenched in her lap. Rudolph, how could you? After everything we've done for you, everything we've sacrificed. I know, Mother, Rodolphe said, his voice breaking. I know what I am. That night, when Bruno and I met by the river, he was more aggressive than usual, more threatening. When I tried to explain that I needed more time to get the money, he began talking about father, about how disappointed the great Count d'Entverton would be to learn the truth about his precious son. So you killed him, stated Jap matter-of-factly, his pen scratching across his notebook. There was a tire iron in the stolen car I had brought, Rodolphe said, his eyes distant as he relived the moment. When he turned his back to light a cigarette, I struck him just once. He fell and didn't get up again. And then you disposed of the body and the car at Rotherhithe, Poirot said, completing the narrative. I panicked, Rudolph admitted. I put him in the passenger seat and drove until I found a place where I could push the car into the water. I thought it would sink completely, that no one would ever find it. I found myself studying the Count's face during his son's confession. The pain there was profound. Not just the anguish of a father hearing his child admit to murder, but the deeper agony of a man realizing that his elaborate sacrifice had been in vain. Tell me, Monsieur Long, Poirot said gently, when did your son first come to you with his confession? The morning after the murder, the Count replied quietly, his voice heavy with defeat. He appeared at dawn, disheveled and terrified, babbling about what he had done. We decided that the only way to protect the family name was for him to disappear, while I took responsibility for the crime. And the amnesia charade? Poirot asked. I thought it would provide a defense of diminished capacity, while also explaining why I couldn't provide details about the crime, the Count said. I had hoped that without clear evidence, the case would eventually be dismissed. A plan worthy of one of your adventure novels, monsieur, Poirot said, a touch of admiration in his voice. But you failed to account for the investigative capabilities of the modern police force, and your son's inability to follow through with his part of the bargain. As the formal charges were read and young Rudolph was prepared for transport to custody, I witnessed a scene that would remain etched in my memory forever. The Count, his elaborate deception finally exposed, sat in his chair like a man who had aged a decade in the space of an hour. I failed you, Rodolphe, he said as the handcuffs were applied to his son's wrists. No, father, Rudolph replied, his voice thick with emotion. You tried to save me when I didn't deserve saving. That's more than most sons could ask for. The Ars Countess, who had maintained her icy composure throughout most of the proceedings, finally spoke, her voice cold and unforgiving. Don't expect me to forgive either of you, she said. You, Amy, for your ridiculous theatrics, and you, Rodolphe, for bringing this shame upon our family. You made your choices. You associated with criminals. You committed fraud. You murdered a man. And then you allowed your father to sacrifice himself for your crimes. I wash my hands of both of you. As we prepared to leave the Santa Verita residence for the final time, I reflected on the tragedy we had witnessed. A father's love had driven him to attempt an extraordinary deception, while a son's weakness had destroyed not only his victim, but the very family he had killed to protect. "Tell me, Poirot," I said as our cab wound through the London streets, the afternoon light casting golden hues on the buildings. "Do you believe the Count's amnesia was entirely fabricated, or did genuine shock play a role?" "Ah, mon ami," Poirot replied thoughtfully, gazing out the window. "I suspect the truth lies somewhere between the two. The shock of learning his son was a murderer may have genuinely affected his mental state initially, but the decision to maintain and elaborate upon that condition was quite deliberate." "And what will happen to him now?" I asked. "He will face charges for interfering with a police investigation and making false statements," Poirot said. "But given the circumstances and his age, I suspect the court will be lenient." "The real tragedy," I observed, "is not just Bruno's death, or even Rodolphe's arrest. It's the complete destruction of a family, through a combination of weakness, misguided love, and the desperate attempts to preserve appearances that ultimately destroyed everything they sought to protect." "Indeed, Hastings," Poirot agreed, his voice soft. "And perhaps most tragic of all is that the Count's sacrifice was rendered meaningless, not by our investigation, but by his son's inability to follow through with the plan they had agreed upon. Had Rudolph truly disappeared as promised, the Count's deception might have succeeded." As our vehicle carried us away from Eaton Square, I found myself contemplating the price of family loyalty and the terrible choices people make in the name of love. The case of the Nameless Man was closed, but the human cost of the truth would linger long after the legal proceedings were concluded. The Count's noble attempt to save his son had failed, not because of any flaw in his performance, but because of the very weakness in character that had necessitated the deception in the first place. It was a bitter irony that would haunt the Santa Verita name for generations to come. Epilogue: The Price of Love. 3 weeks after Rudolphe de Santa Vertan's arrest, November's chill had settled over London, wrapping Scotland Yard in a grey fog. Poirot and I sat in Jap's cluttered office, the air heavy with pipe tobacco and the weight of a case concluded. Even Poirot, usually immaculate, showed faint signs of strain, a slightly rumpled tie, a weariness in his posture. "The preliminary hearings are done," said Jap, flipping through a thick file. "Rudolph is set for trial at the Old Bailey. His solicitors are hopeful, arguing provocation and duress. Bruno's blackmail gives a strong case for diminished responsibility." "And the Count?" I asked, picturing the broken aristocrat. "Released with a caution for interfering with the investigation," replied Jap. "The magistrate was lenient, called it a father's desperate bid to save his son. Fines, no prison." Poirot nodded. "And Rudolph's prospects?" "The Crown may accept a manslaughter plea," said Jap. "With his age and family standing, he could get 5 to 7 years, maybe less, with good behavior." "So the Count's sacrifice spared the gallows," I observed. "Ironic," said Jap, lighting his pipe. "If he'd told us about the blackmail up front, we might have caught Bruno before it came to murder." Constable Morrison appeared, his face sympathetic. "The Count and Countess are here to see their son, sir." "Take them to the family room," said Jap. "Give them privacy." Poirot rose, his expression somber. "Come, Hastings. This tragedy's final act deserves witnessing. The visiting room was stark and somber, furnished with a plain wooden table and mismatched chairs against cold gray walls. Through the window glass, we observed the Santa Verda family within. The Count, worn and aged beyond his years, sat with shoulders bowed by the weight of his ordeal. The Countess maintained her unyielding composure, though strain showed in the tightness around her eyes. Rodolphe appeared resigned, a faint trace of relief shadowing his features. "I never wished for any of this, father." Rodolphe spoke softly through the partly open door. "When I learned you had taken the blame—" "My dear son," the Count replied gently, his voice heavy with enduring love. "You remain my flesh and blood, despite all that has transpired." The Countess's hands clenched tightly in her lap. "Aimé, these proceedings will drain us financially and socially. Your theatrical performance has cost us dearly." "Our reputation," the Count responded with quiet firmness, "is nothing compared to our son's life." Rodolphe reached across the table, his hand covering his father's weathered one. "Mother speaks truly about the costs, but my solicitor believes the circumstances favor a plea of provocation. The evidence of systematic blackmail strengthens our defense considerably." "Had you been forthright from the beginning," the Count said sharply, "this entire ordeal might have been avoided." "Honesty," the Count replied, his voice trembling with emotion, "seemed a luxury we could not afford. For 25 years I have loved and protected my son, only to witness my family torn apart by secrets and shame." Rodolphe paled, understanding dawning in his eyes. "You knew about my activities, my associations." "I knew the path you were choosing," the Count affirmed softly. "Biology binds us, but it is love, choice, and unwavering loyalty that forged the truest family bonds." The Countess stiffened, her voice becoming arctic. "Such personal matters are hardly appropriate for this setting." "My son deserves to understand the depth of my devotion," the Count insisted with quiet dignity. Poirot gently touched my shoulder. "Come, Hastings, this moment belongs to them alone." In the hushed corridor outside, I asked, "Do you believe, Poirot, that such profound love, even when met with indifference, truly matters?" He paused thoughtfully, gazing through a grimy window at the London streets below. "Love's worth, mon ami, is not measured by its reception, but by its giving. A father's devotion transforms the giver, ennobles the spirit, regardless of whether it is appreciated or requited. And the tragedy in all this, that such noble love is so often bestowed upon those least capable of comprehending its value." Poirot replied with a gentle sigh. "Yet, like pearls cast before swine, the pearls themselves retain their inherent worth and beauty." As we departed Scotland Yard, I found myself reflecting on the story's profound core. A father's love, misguided, perhaps, but utterly sincere, shining through even the darkest failures of character and family. The Count would return to his quiet existence among his beloved books. Rodolphe would face justice, with perhaps a deeper appreciation for sacrifice. And the Countess would remain isolated within her walls of propriety and coldness. The case of the Nameless Man had concluded, but its deepest lesson lingered. That in a world often marked by selfishness and cruelty, acts of selfless love, however futile they may seem, serve as beacons of hope, reminding us of the nobility the human heart is capable of achieving. As the London fog lifts, Hercule Poirot reveals the Nameless Man as Count Emeter de Santa Verta, whose feigned amnesia shielded his son, Rodolphe, the true killer, driven by blackmail's crushing weight. The case of the Nameless Man concludes with justice served. Yet echoes of a father's sacrificial love linger like Thames mist. We hope this descent into hidden truths has gripped you, dear listeners. Did you suspect the Count's noble deception? Or were you swayed by his son's guilt? Share your thoughts below. If the case of the Nameless Man has enthralled you, please like and subscribe to Cafe Tales for more tales of suspense. Thank you for joining us, and until our next tale, may your nights be filled with intrigue and your days with clarity.